When you think the term global crisis, your mind might conjure up climate change or maybe the arms race. But there's another crisis currently happening that you don't hear a lot about. Across the world, antibiotics are becoming less and less effective. Not a big deal, you say? Well, according to a recent report in New Scientist, researchers found that antibiotic resistance killed more people than malaria or AIDS in 2019. That's about 1.3 million deaths directly caused by drug-resistant antibacterial infections in 2019. Canada's Asep Medical is doing something about this crisis. The company, which consolidated two development stage companies, Sepsis Bioscience and ABT Innovations, says its purpose is to mitigate the global crisis of antibiotic failure by improving patient odds of survival and quality of life. Now, Cantech Letter sits down with CEO Rudy Mazzocchi to find out how. All right, Cantech Letter sitting down with Asep Medical CEO Rudy Mazzocchi. Rudy, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the time today.
Good stuff. Tell us how Asep Medical got started, Rudy.
Yeah, the company founder is actually Professor Robert Hancock. He's probably one of the top renowned cited scientists in this space. Actually, I think he's ranked in the top 200 or 250 scientists around the world. And this is the result of his life work. He originally founded two companies. One was called Sepsis, it's a diagnostic technology, and ABT Innovation, the sort of the peptide therapeutic element, to assess and treat sepsis-related disorders. So Asep Medical, we later formed that as a legal entity to acquire the controlling rights of these two companies, with a future option to acquire the remaining equity balance. So what we provide at Asep Medical is management and business development services, corporate governance, regulatory filings and meeting all those requirements, ongoing prosecution of intellectual property, and public and investor relations.
What problems are you trying to solve as a company?
Well, this is a very rare combination. I've been in this industry for over 3 decades now, I hate to admit. So this is a rare combination of both a diagnostic and therapeutic platform technology designed to address what's a huge multi-billion-dollar global problem of antibiotic failure by improving patients' odds. We strive to increase their odds of survival and quality of life. So I think this is probably the next big potential pandemic. There's over 50 million identified cases of sepsis every year. And 65% of all infections include something known as a biofilm. This sort of colonies or clumps of bacteria that become resistant to antibiotics. And there's currently no drugs approved for these related biofilms. So we both have, again, both an assessment tool and a very novel therapy.
That's such a big problem you're endeavoring to solve. The overuse of antibiotics leads to the antibiotic resistance bacteria. So what problems, Rudy, do we face now with this that we didn't face before?
Well, as moms are saying right now, they don't want their kids taking all these different antibiotics. Overuse of antibiotics really drives antimicrobial resistance. And that's a factor in another 5 million deaths every year. And physicians right now are running out of appropriate antibiotics to treat these major pathogens.
Is it the human use, though, of antibiotics, the overuse that's leading to this crisis, or is it their overuse in farming that's the big problem here?
Well, both are really strong factors, right? In addition to the human prescribed overuse here in the US, for example, 86% of our antibiotics are used in animals. But these aren't the most potent classes of antibiotics, which further stimulates resistance. So both drive this resistance, and there's now an increasing reluctancy by agencies like the FDA to even approve antibiotics strictly for farm animal use.
Asep Medical recently announced the results of a study you completed with RTI Health Solutions regarding sepsis. And you just touched on sepsis a bit earlier, but tell us again, what is sepsis and why is its early diagnosis, Rudy, so important here?
Great question. So, sepsis, it's the body's apparent and dysfunctional response. It's actually an immunological dysfunction in responding to infections that lead to multi-organ failure and eventually death. So as identified in this study, every hour we delay in initiating a therapy increases the mortality risk, right? The increase of death by 5 to 8%. for every hour we delay. So with early diagnosis, it's been very difficult because early symptoms are non-specific. So conventional therapy right now, or technology to assess and diagnose, takes about 48 to 72 hours. Everyone can relate to now rapid tests with COVID. It's very similar. It's like doing a long-term PCR test versus the rapid test. But again, every hour that we wait, you increase the death rate, the mortality rate by 5 or 8%. So our diagnostic assay provides physicians with information within 1 hour. So it's sort of the rapid test for sepsis, if you will. With the certainty they need to begin treating patients appropriately. So, and that's another whole Pandora's box, trying to determine what is that cocktail or therapy, what's the appropriate therapy once you assess. But also the test results informs us of who's not susceptible to sepsis, right? And that again avoids the use of these potent antibiotics, which then drives further resistance. So the assessment and the diagnosis is very, very key, as soon as possible.
Really interesting product Asep Medical has is this novel antibiofilm peptide technology. I know it's in advanced development through collaboration with your pre-trial partner, iFiber, and you were granted funding from the United States Army Medical Research and Material Command, right? Can you tell us about the wound care that is possible with this?
Absolutely. So yeah, it's a very exciting relationship, and wound care in the field, and right, it's complicated, because these biofilm infections are really resistant, extremely resistant to most treatments, and it really inhibits wound healing. So we actually hold we have multiple patents in 3 different patent families that are directed to the treatment of these biofilms and suppression of excessive inflammation. So these peptide therapies actually destroy the biofilm and allow the wound to heal. So, and today there's no approved treatments directed just directly at biofilms, in usually combinations of antibiotics or even agents like silver. They use silver ions to treat, but these are often used. But our peptides have outperformed these in all early animal studies.
That's quite something. Tell us who Asep Medical sells to, and how is that an improvement over what they were doing before?
Well, it'll be a prescription, right? It's both a diagnostic tool and then a prescriptive drug. But we're in the process, and this is sort of a classic biotech play, early stage company, of identifying appropriate strategic corporate partners, right? Including big pharma, big diagnostic companies with whom we'll partner for final clinical development and regulatory approval in various countries throughout the world. Big pharma, they love to control the labeling, the outcomes of a clinical study, which leads to the marketing claims. So we'll partner with them. And as previously stated, there's no optimal assessment of or therapeutic tool available today. We believe these technologies can impact millions of lives each year. So we have an obligation, if you will, right, to identify the best partners possible to take this to the global markets. We're not going to build and finance and start our own sales and marketing team, right? We've got to rely on the footprint that these large companies have. So that's our strategy.
So what does your balance sheet look like? And do you have enough capital to execute on your business plan?
Also a relevant question. So we currently have sufficient capital to advance our diagnostic technology through clinical studies and then a regulatory submission to the FDA, which we're planning to do by the end of the year. And that's going to be a key trigger for attracting the appropriate strategic corporate partner. We also have capital to complete the validation studies associated with our therapeutic technology to support advancement into clinical trials. So we'll be working with the FDA and regulatory agencies by year end for the diagnostic and in clinical trials for the therapy. But as previously stated, it's anticipated that a partnership with a commercialization partner will include potentially even milestone payments to support our clinical and regulatory process in exchange for exclusive commercialization rights. So that's our play, but regardless, we also have access to capital markets as we expand our shareholder base. We're in the process. We've just recently crossed over to the US OTC markets here from the Canadian Securities Exchange. And I've had experience in uplisting, if you will, these companies also to the NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. So access to capital, if and when we need it, we can access that capital.
Right. Now, when you talk about growth, do you think it's going to be organic, or do you see this happening more through acquisition?
Very, very organic. Our pipeline is already very, very deep, very rich, and includes opportunities in even other large market segments that struggle with early diagnosis and treatment of sepsis. Sepsis is a problem in oral health, dental medicine, so even in veterinarian medicine. So we have a very deep pipeline. However, by nature, I think we always keep our eyes open for the additional assets that might complement our mission, for sure.
Right. Next 12 months, Rudy, what do you hope to accomplish with Asep Medical?
Well, as I touched on, I think we're in the process of crossing over from the Canadian exchange to the OTC QB. We've just become DCT eligible. We also have a defined pathway to a potential NASDAQ uplisting. Meanwhile, we're just going to continue to stay focused on finalizing our clinical development of our technologies, initiating those important corporate strategic partnerships, and also stated earlier, we intend to complete clinical trials of our diagnostic technologies in order to submit to the FDA for approval by year end. So while advancing into the clinic for our therapy. So it's a lot on our plate for this year, but we're on track.
Super fascinating business, important area. Rudy Mazzocchi, CEO of Asep Medical. Rudy, thank you so much for the chat.
Well, my pleasure. Hope to see you again soon.